Scarlett Johnson. Big round of applause.
Hi. I just wanted to start off with something that I have hanging up in my house that was my dad's, who is a military vet who re-enlisted after 9/11 and did tours in Afghanistan and one in Iraq. I was raised in a very patriotic family, anyways, I think this means something right now. It's the tale of two wolves. One evening, an old Cherokee told his grandson about a battle that goes on inside people. He said, "My son, the battle is between two wolves inside us all. One is evil. It is anger, jealousy, envy, doubt, sorrow, regret, greed, self-pity, guilt, resentment, inferiority, lies, false pride, superiority, and ego. The other is good. It is joy, peace, love, hope, humility, serenity, kindness, benevolence, empathy, generosity, forgiveness, truth, compassion, and faith." The grandson thought about it for a minute and then asked his grandfather, "Which wolf wins?" The old Cherokee simply replied, "The one you feed." When skin color and race are turned into currency, our society is forced into ethical dilemmas that are difficult to solve. The solution, it seems, is to shut down reason and simply feel our way through complicated issues, which inevitably result in racism in the name of anti-racism and inequality in the name of equality. This was not the dream of Martin Luther King, who did not fight to separate and divide, but to unite. According to Dr. King, segregation not only harms one physically, but injures one spiritually. It scars the soul. It is a system which forever stares the segregated in the face, saying, "You are less than, you are not equal to." However, chaos and disorder was the dream of Karl Marx. Marxism stokes hate, promotes division, provokes the underclass revolution, then offers nothing but a cruel, etc. Marxism failed to achieve authoritarian socialism in America, not only because of the success of free markets, but equally important are the Judeo-Christian ethics that are the foundation of this republic. So where class warfare failed in the West, a new tactic emerged, a cultural revolution, a march through the institutions. Undermine and infiltrate institutions, and there will be no need for a bloody revolution. The culture will surrender itself willingly. Max Horkheimer, Marxist German philosopher, director of the Institute for Social Research, who helped develop critical theory in the 1930s, wrote, "The revolution won't happen with guns. Rather, it will happen incrementally, year by year, generation by generation. We will gradually infiltrate their educational institutions and their political offices, transforming them slowly into Marxist entities as we move towards universal egalitarianism." We can all agree racism is evil. It is evil to spew hate against anyone based on their identity, religion, or skin color. Yet today, far-left activists spew hate so vile, one can almost hear the cheers of the world's worst actors as they speak. If we can all agree that identity politics only divide our country, we can all agree that it is morally and ethically wrong for institutions of education to align with a far-left radical pedagogy which organizes all of us by our race and identity, tearing down the individual. We can no longer deny that universities and K-12 educational establishments are actively dismantling the grand narrative upon which the West has organized itself. That is the sovereignty of the individual. It is not a perfect narrative, and while detailed in writing, we know millions of American lives were lost to get to where we are today. A place where individual rights are fully codified into law, with the overwhelming majority of Western society recognizing the value and worth of the individual, regardless of identity. Before COVID, Western societies were freer and better functioning than any other in the world, and are still thus after COVID. I know the current state of Western affairs seems quite forlorn, but that is not because Western philosophy and science failed us. We failed it. Radicals on the left see a barrier to their collectivist vision, and they want to rip it down. Failing to heed Chesterton's warning, do not remove a fence until you understand why it was put there in the first place. second-order thinking, true critical thinking, which requires discourse, is rejected by critical race theorists, and this should scare you. Shielding neo-racism with the cloak of diversity is beyond reprehensible, yet so eager are institutions to be seen as anti-racist that they have bowed to the spirit of the age and turned their back on truth and reason. Enter critical race theory. I'm going to simplify several complex philosophical tenets as best I can in order to explain CRT, critical race theory. I'm just going to say CRT. Critical theory is an ideology that divides the world into oppressed groups and oppressor groups, and seeks to liberate the oppressed. It is currently the reigning theoretical paradigm in academic disciplines like gender studies, critical pedagogy, critical race theory, anthropology, queer theory, and forms the ideological foundation for large segments of the secular social justice movement. The cornerstone of critical race theory is the idea that the United States is a fundamentally racist country. Therefore, all our institutions, including law, culture, business, the economy, and education, are all designed to maintain white supremacy. All of these institutions are simply beyond reforming. They must be dismantled in order to liberate the oppressed. CRT takes the old Marxist concept of the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, or the oppressed and the oppressor, and instead of looking at people and groups in economic terms, as Karl Marx, the theory grasps a new identity politics based on racial terms. Instead of life experience viewed through economic class, poor versus rich, one views all of life's experiences through the lens of skin color and racial identity, black versus white. This is the new oppressor and oppressed groups. All of the old Marxist class-based dialectic is really just reinterpreted through the lens of race. Does this make you uncomfortable? Well, that is just proof of your white fragility, which is proof of your racism and your complicity in white supremacy. In essence, Robin DiAngelo is letting you know you can't win. You can't tie up the score, and you can't end the game. You can only do the work of anti-racism forever, because racism is forever. White fragility is a term invented by CRT scholars. If your child's district discusses white fragility, if they recommend you read DiAngelo's best-selling book, they are peddling a core concept of CRT. It is important to note that you will not hear the term critical race theory in your school board meetings. Educators will tell you they don't even know what that is. What you must understand is that CRT is the higher order philosophy that underpins the social sciences and humanities. Meaning, if one has attained a degree with a major in education, political science, like me, or journalism over the last few decades, then one has also attained a minor in neo-Marxism or critical race theory for free. There are 4 principles of CRT. First, racism is normal and everything is racist. As Vadi Basham tells us, according to CRT, all white people are part of the hegemonic, the ruling or dominant oppression. Whether you see it or know it, you just are. As I stated earlier, if you don't believe everything is racist, well, that is proof that you are racist and everything is racist. You notice the circular logic. You may say, hey, wait a minute. I have volunteered for worthy causes. I donated to charities. I've never personally discriminated. You don't know me. Unfortunately, you are not absolved. The second tenet of CRT, convergence theory, tells us that any perceived righteousness you think you have isn't real. Your interests as a white person simply converged with the interests of a POC. As a white person or white adjacent person, you are incapable of heroism, righteousness, goodness, empathy, even neutrality, because everything is racist. Incurably racist. As a white person, you are condemned by your melanin count. As an aside, do you now see what even today a lot of people of color, I'm Hispanic, reject CRT? It's over the top. Fair-minded Americans of every color should reject this claim. What about the evidence? What about this study or that study? Citations, facts. Well, there you go again with your scientific method and reason. Of course you want to use Western ways of knowing, but you can't rebuild the master's house using the master's tools. This brings us to the third principle of CRT, anti-liberalism. CRT questions the very foundations of the liberal order: liberal arts, equality theory, legal reasoning, Enlightenment rationalism, and very importantly, neutral principles of constitutional law. Radical feminist and avowed Marxist Audre Lorde famously said, "For the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. They may allow us to temporarily beat him at his own game, but they will never enable us to bring about genuine change." Lorde is telling fellow radicals to reach down into that deep place of knowledge and touch the terror and loathing. See whose face it wears. Only then can the personal, as the political, be illuminated. What are the master's tools? Data science, logic, reason, mathematics, the Socratic method, thousands of years of Western philosophy, law, ancient Western culture, great works of art, Judeo-Christian values, the Enlightenment. These are the pillars of traditional American society and of Western Europe, the foundations of the free world. CRT theorists say revolutionaries should not be bound by these master's tools in their reimagined society. They are unnecessary. You really have to let that sink in. You can't falsify claims using logic, reason, observable science, metaphysics, Western values, Western legal theory, and practices. In their world, that can be considered racist. There are other ways of knowing, and according to CRT's fourth principle, knowledge isn't objective, it is socially constructed. In a culture, the hegemony is simply socially constructed by the oppressor for the purpose of oppression. For them, objective truth is a lie. Early CRT theorist Richard Delgado said, "Storytelling, narrative reading are the way Black and brown people forward knowledge versus science and reason-based methods of white people." Did you hear that? Science and reasoning are white constructs. The scientific method is white. So the Western way of knowing must be deconstructed in order to break the current hegemony. The marginalized, because of their lived experience within this oppressive culture, have ways of knowing you can't access. So sit down, shut up, elevate their voices, silence yours, and believe. Minority status brings with it a presumed competence to speak about race and racism that overcome all other ways of knowing. Notice I said believe. You have to believe, because one cannot simply say 2 + 2 is 5. You must prove you believe it. Orwell was a prophet. Orwell's experience with Stalinism tormented him such that his dying work was a warning to us all. I hope we heed it. What about my voice? I'm Hispanic, born into poverty, and I challenge CRT. Unfortunately, my voice should not be elevated because I'm guilty of brown fragility. According to Robin DiAngelo, my interests converge with my white oppressors, therefore I am complicit as white. What about Shelby Steele or Thomas Sowell, Candace Owens, Jason Whitmore, Glenn Lowry, Harold Slayton, John McWhorter, many others? These Black contrarians who speak out against CRT are now white adjacent, and the hatred and vitriol towards them, unfortunately, is more intense than that of a white oppressor. Tribalism this intense must be rejected by all of us. The left cannot only celebrate those people of color who agree with them and ignore the achievements of people of color who reject their narratives. Dr. Shelby Steele, the former civil rights activist and now research fellow at Stanford, put it this way: CRT is a political identity that collectivizes people, one that herds them into victim-focused identities and consoles them with a vague myth of their own superiority. According to Black scholar Robert Woodson, we need to counter this false CRT racial narrative with examples of values of resilience. Children should be taught American virtues and values in action, when whites were at their worst and we were at our best. Blacks achieving against the odds will give evidence that America is one of the greatest countries on earth, because even those who suffered were never defined by that oppressive system. Blacks are not defined by oppression, he said, but determination and self-sufficiency, even against all odds. Now, isn't that the message that would be best for our institutions to tell children? To celebrate achievements and profound leaps forward doesn't delete past wrongs or deny present issues of race and class in America. Telling the truth about the good is equally as important as honesty about the bad. We can cheer progress and always be vigilant against racism and inequality. Only Marxists and extremists see the world as a zero-sum game. Only evil seeks revenge and comeuppance. Once school boards recognize the truth, they cannot and should not feel compelled to speak their talking points or tolerate their politics in the classroom. That propaganda deserves no recognition in my child's school. Activist parents can share their political and cultural beliefs at home or in their private sphere of influence. Children in a classroom are a captive audience who cannot choose to opt out of the attempted indoctrination. The children are too often afraid to tell their parents and make a fuss. Some kids feel free to speak and others do not, and this silence is encouraged when a teacher and a school put equity, as defined by critical race theory, first. When you hear equity, think equality of outcomes. Parents do not be fooled, and communities do not be fooled. I know you may think that many staff and administrators in your district who are committed to CRT, notice they say those who are committed to CRT, are blind to what is going on. Unfortunately, if you think that, you do not understand what is happening. Could you, with facts or reason and limited time, deprogram? No. What has taken a great many years of manipulation and tortured logic to create cannot be undone with a strongly worded email. That doesn't mean you can't have a short-term win. It does mean that those victories only come with accepting the true nature of that which you fight, and a willingness to be actively engaged in your community. You cannot go back to sleep and let zealots take the reins. You may not even recognize what you would wake up to if you do. I know those of you who are new to CRT find this language harsh, but lying to you would only set you up for failure. We are only a few years behind California. Our sincere desire to end racism, our hatred of bigotry, our dream of equality, and our sincere disgust for past injustice, that is all being manipulated. The work to correct injustice does not begin with hatred towards those who think differently compared to you. It doesn't begin with blaming all society's ills on white children and their white parents, most of whom emigrated to this country decades after slavery. In Wisconsin, poor Eastern European and Scandinavian farmers and laborers who arrived here, uneducated and desperate, are not seriously to be described as oppressors, are they? Their children and grandchildren heirs of oppression? Really? I cannot think of a theory more useful to the father of lies and one more repugnant to the Father in heaven. And I'll end with this. In How to Be an Anti-Racist, Ibram X. Kendi admonished white people on their journey to anti-racism. Fighting an addiction, being an anti-racist requires persistent self-awareness, constant self-criticism, and regular self-examination. Here's another quote. We still have to wage a protracted struggle against bourgeois and petty bourgeois ideology. It is wrong not to understand this and to give up our ideological struggles. All erroneous ideas, all poisonous weeds, all ghosts and monsters must be subject to criticism. In no circumstances should they be allowed to spread unchecked. That was Mao Zedong. There is no communism or Marxism, but representative democracy and social justice and a well-planned economy. Fidel Castro. If you tremble with indignation at every injustice, then you are a comrade of mine. Che Guevara. You see, radical Marxist social justice always starts off with an ideal and always ends in catastrophe. A society built on nihilism, a rejection of all religious and moral principles, built on an assertion that objective knowledge is impossible, that debate of ideas is racist, meaning it's evil, is a society built on a thin crust over hot lava. One small fissure and it's over. As it turns out, the destruction of competency, meritocracy, free markets, capitalism, Western values, enlightenment truths, rationality and reason itself do not bring about utopia or end inequality and poverty. The abhorrent reality is that over 100 million souls have been sacrificed to the vision and reinterpretations of Karl Marx. If only our teens read the Gulag Archipelago instead of How to Be an Anti-Racist. As Westerners, we are deeply empathetic to the unjust pain and suffering. CRT understands this and manipulates this. We are told, let's have a conversation about race. That is what the equity and diversity counselors told stakeholders in my district. That is what CRT educators tell students until that conversation gets off script, shutting down the conversation. How do you shut down a conversation? By engaging in dialogue and expressing disagreement. Unless it's not a conversation at all, unless the intent is for you and for your child to shut up, elevate, and believe marginalized voices, and ultimately transfer your power to them. Remember, Marxism is all about power. Marxism is the religion of revenge, the creed of hate. It is a rebellion against Western civilization, science, and reason, as well as Judeo-Christian values. CRT is the means. Totalitarianism is the end. Friends, do not fall for the big lie. We must every day make the conscious decision to live not by lies. We must refuse to be defined by anything other than the content of our character. I will end with this quote that I'm sure you will recognize. You and I have a rendezvous with destiny. We'll preserve for our children this, the last best hope of man on earth, or we'll sentence them to the last step into 1,000 years of darkness. And that's it.